Of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. As always, I do want to start by recognizing that we are gathered on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and to express gratitude that we're able to do the important work of this committee on lands that they've stewarded since time immemorial. Before getting into the substance of today's meeting, I just want to deal with some unfinished business from our last meeting. At the end of the meeting, Mr. Genuis raised a point of privilege, and just for members' recollection, he said that we had an instance today where ministers were asked direct questions by multiple different members of the opposition. They refused to answer some. They prevaricated in multiple responses to others. I believe that you will find this is a matter touching on the privileges of members. If you so find it, prepared to move the appropriate motion. Witnesses are not allowed to just refuse direct questions, whether they are ministers or other witnesses. That is the rule of process, hence the question of privilege. I look forward to your ruling on that. So I just want to get back to that first here. I wasn't quite prepared to make a decision on this at the time because, as many members will know, there's lots of things that are happening committee at any one time for the chair to be on top of, and I wanted to have a chance to review the blues to see what was said and the answers. I hope members know that I took this very seriously, and I tried to do everything I can to ensure that members have the appropriate time to ask their questions and to get substantial answers. And, you know, I think it is there. In this case, the ministers did answer the questions. They were maybe not the answers that members were looking for. They were maybe not as specific and direct of an answers. But I do believe that the ministers did provide answers to those questions. And in many cases, ministers were actually interrupted in the process of answering those questions as well, or there was very long questions, and then the ministers, as they were answering those questions, were interrupted. And I think there's many questions that were answered where there may not have been a very simple answer to them, even if there was a yes or no question that was asked. So while I do very much sympathize with this motion, and I do believe it's important for ministers to do their very best and all witnesses to do their very best to answer those questions, I don't believe that this meets the threshold of being a violation of the privilege of members. There will always be opportunities for members and the committee to reinvite these ministers or other witnesses to reappear before the committee to answer similar or different questions, and it is the will of the committee to do that. But my ruling is that this is not actually a point of privilege. So isn't this okay? So I had Mr. Batiste first here with your hand up.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. And I agree with you that, while the questions were being asked seem like they are very straightforward answers, I know that this very topic that Mr. Genuis is alluded to and asked to the minister over is actually in another committee right now being discussed. And the basis of his questions was that the minister should or should not know who is an Indigenous person in Canada. Indigeneity in there's no one term or one description of who is and who isn't Indigenous that covers Inuit, Métis, First Nations. So for Mr. Genuous to ask questions that seem like they're as simple, is is this person Indigenous? Should this person pay back money? Pre-assumes that our minister should be able to determine who is an Indigenous person and who isn't. The United Nations, Article 33, makes it clear that it is the nations to decide who belongs to that nation. And UNDRIP is law in Canada, and it's important that when we were looking at implementing UNDRIP, that we don't expect ministers to break from that and start making claims and answering questions based on their belief rather than what the law is or what those nations say. That's a very paternal way of looking at it, and our government does its best to ensure that paternalistic thinking in the past isn't reflected today. And so while it may seem like non-answers for Mr. Genuous on a very complicated subject, in fact, the minister was doing what's required under the law, under UNDRIP, under reconciliation to do that. And for anyone to state that, that she was willingly not answering a question that was straightforward and simple is just disingenuous. And I know that's not the case with my colleague Itala Laurie, who asked questions and didn't get the answers she would have liked, or that she thought that they could have been answered better. And I'm not going to say that her questions or diminish the frustration that she has in that. But Mr. Genuous definitely, I felt, was way off in terms of trying to make something very straightforward, that something isn't very straightforward in his privilege motion that seems to be presumptive in saying that that ministers should be able to determine who is and who isn't Indigenous and the consequences of their indigeneity when it comes to procurement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Batiste. Next, I have Mr. Smales.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate your decision, but unfortunately we disagree, so we'd like to challenge the Chair.
So we're going to call a vote then.
So voting yes means you sustain the decision. No means you overturn the decision. Mr. Batiste.
Once again, I didn't understand what you meant by, I would vote that the chair did not break any rules. And if I'm voting against this motion, then I'm voting against the challenge of the chair. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sustained.
So it's a yes.
Sustained. Yeah.
Sustained.
Sustained is voting with the chair.
Is
Okay.
You decide that you say that the decision of the chair is correct if you say yes.
Okay. On this circumstance, not in everything in general, but
Come on.
for this specific one. I got to be careful here. It's in the morning. The coffee hasn't kicked in yet, so I'm voting to sustain this motion.
Mr. Carr.
Yes.
Ms. Atwin.
Yes.
Mr. Hanley.
Yes.
Mr. McLeod.
I agree with the chair, sustain.
Mr. Melillo.
No.
Mr. Schmel.
No.
Mr. Shields. Mr. Zimmer.
No.
Monsieur Lemire.
Oui.
Ms. Idelaut.
I say no because I didn't get the answers I was to my questions. I was asking for clarification, but I didn't get the. It wasn't understandable, or it wasn't clear enough, and I'm not saying what I'm expecting. I'm just saying that I want my questions to be answered properly. Because they were just answering questions without really going into the question. So I say no.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
OK. First, I have Mr. Smale, et après ça, Monsieur Lemire.
Okay, Chair, thank you. Because we are dealing with this business, I'd like to move a motion, if I could, that Ministers Hayju and Minister Vendel be asked to return to the committee within 2 weeks and for 2 hours to answer questions, and that, if they do not return as requested, the Chair be instructed to report to the House a recommendation that the committee be empowered to order the Minister's attendance from time to time as it sees fit.
OK. A motion has been moved. I don't know if that will be circulated to members. That would be helpful, but I think it is fairly clear. And let me know if we do have any debate.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Did we get this in advance before under the normal 48-hour deadline? I don't remember seeing this.
We'll just pause for 1 second, Mr. Batiste. So. So, Mr. Batiste, to your question this was not circulated in advance, but it relates to the business that we're dealing with at hand here. So that type of notice is not required in these types of circumstances. In any event, it would be helpful to circulate that to members here.
Yes, just send it to the clerk in both official languages.
Mr. McLeod?
Mr. Chair, for clarity, so this is not notice of a motion, this is the actual motion that we're talking about.
Based on the business.
And it's in order because it is in order? You're ruling it in order?
Sure, Mr. McLeod.
I'm just trying to follow this. So we had already voted on the motion of privilege. That's dealt with, I would assume, because the vote was decided. So, but I'm having a hard time agreeing that this is in order as the motion of privilege is dealt with. So this is really not a motion tied to the motion of privilege.
Oh, so it's not?
No, it's
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was confused with the advice you were giving me.
Confused with what you said, too.
Okay. Sorry, I got some bad advice. And there was some misinterpretation of what was said here.
Not from me, I hope.
And sorry, I think there was some confusion here a little bit with what was brought forward. So we have dealt with this. That was actually completed with the vote. There's a lack of clarity here, but this would have to be noticed because it was finished. So
If
I
you-
apologize for that confusion.
If you were ruling that it has to be put on notice, then I'd put that motion on notice and it should be circulated.
Thank you very much. That is duly noted, and we will be able to return to this, I assume, on Monday, when that proper notice period has exceeded. So with that, unless there are any other questions, I would like to get to the matter at hand for today.
So before we go, Chair, I'd like to challenge that decision, please.
Great. Well, it's one of those mornings here, it seems. So.
Mr. Baptiste?
I am voting to sustain and agree with the chair, not the Conservatives, if that's clear.
Mr. Carr?
Oui.
Ms. Satwin?
Yes.
Mr. Hanley?
Yes.
Mr. McLeod?
Yes.
Mr. Melillo?
No.
Mr. Schmel?
No.
Mr. Shields? Mr. Zimmer?
No.
Monsieur Lemire?
No.
Ms. Adlaut?
I say no.
Five yeas, 6 nays.
Okay. Overruled. Okay, I guess with that, Mr. Smell, you may speak to it.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to quickly talk about this motion. Obviously, I think many members around this table felt that their answers were not sufficient in the questions asked. I think they were pretty straightforward questions, given the fact that there is an Indigenous procurement program, and the minister herself had difficulty answering questions or avoided answering questions on some of the specifics of the program. And I think that we, as the opposition, felt that was very concerning, and that's the reason why we're calling Minister Hajdu, and of course my colleague Mr. Zimmer, who had some questions for Minister Vandel, felt the same way, that his questions were not adequately answered. So I think it's imperative that we get the ministers back as soon as possible and drill down on some of these issues, because it's affecting the lives of many, and I'm sure they want the answers too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmel. Après ça, on a Monsieur Lemire.
Now we'll go to Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to respond to this referring to hockey. I think that the offense exists in the sense that I also don't feel that I received a response to my question that would allow me to move forward on the project. The minister did not clarify her intentions and her leadership on multiple files. That being said, I was not necessarily in favor of the question of privilege at the House of Commons. It's a very severe punishment or penalty, as would be the case in hockey as well. But I do think it would be reasonable to hear from the minister again, so I would support the motion to summon the minister once again to have her give us a more clear vision of her vision of things for Indigenous people.
Monsieur Lemire, et j'aime beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire, and I much appreciate your analogy.
Next, I have Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I asked a fairly simple question and didn't get an answer. The minister didn't have it, so I think that would be an opportunity for the minister to return with that answer. But secondly, committees are master of their own destiny here, and it does leave this, in this clause in it, it does leave that opportunity for the committee then again to actually decide what they do with this request. So there's two parts to it. It's a recognition of we didn't get enough answers, or answers that we were asking, and two, finally in the second part of it, it still retains the power to the finality of it for their appearance. So it puts the power back in the committee to make decisions as they should. And I think that's why this is a good motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shields. Next on the list, I have Ms. Idloud.
Thank you, Chairperson. I want to speak about this because, for this reason, I want to make this, put this out there because questions have a reason, and they pertain to the work we are doing for it. But when the ministers are not answering our questions, it hinders the work we are doing. For example, if we get the correct answers or right answers for our questions, we can find solutions or strategize to for example, Minister Vandel, I asked him when I asked 3 points about my question. If he was able to answer my question, I would be able to get more information, proper information, and then be able to ask questions with my constituents, and then I would be able to ask more questions to this committee. But when they are not answering the questions, as a member of parliament, it essentially stopped my role. So when they're not answering the questions, I'm not effectively doing my role. So, I agree with the ministers that they should be answering the questions. If they are properly answering questions, we as members of parliament will be able to effectively do our work. Because we need to inform our constituents of what the work we are doing. Because when they're not answering the questions, there's roadblocks or. So I urge the ministers to answer the questions so we can effectively do our work as members of parliament. If we, for the work we are doing today, for the in the committee, I would like this. I would like to see this.
Thank you very much, Ms. Idlout. Next on our speaking list, we have Mr. Batiste.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I think that it's important that we get time with the ministers. It's important for members to be able to ask questions to ministers. And like Mr. Shield said, the committees are masters of their own domain. However, today we showed up looking to talk about First Nations clean water. And as someone who's coming to you from a First Nations community on Mi'kmaq Reserve, I can tell you with confidence that probably the majority of communities out there would like us to resume discussion on First Nations clean water, ensuring that in the future, governments will not be able to abandon their duties on this, that they're going to have regulations. This is what this committee, I think, would be best to spend their time on. In terms of having questions put forth to ministers and able to, for my colleagues to be able to do their job, I'll put it in 3 parts. First of all, the Conservatives are bringing up a question that is currently under study by another committee, which would make answering these questions before the committee concludes their study kind of in poor form for ministers. Before the end of a actual study that's going on, ministers are being asked to answer questions. Ask for my colleague Sebastian. One of the things that I would be glad to arrange is a personal sit down with the minister, where you can have an actual discussion and a dialogue where 5 minutes or 2.5 minutes to ask a question rarely gives good answers and a really good back and forth. If we are genuine in terms of saying, here are some of the questions that we have and we need to have answers, I'm sure that the ministers would, I can arrange to gladly sit down with Ms. Siddelaut and Mr. Lemaire in terms of getting questions and answers to the specific things that isn't constructed by the time that we have here before them. And more than happy to do that. But I think that in order for us to maximize the best time that we have for this, I would not ask ministers to show up and prolong what First Nations have been seeking for generations is the access to clean water. And I've done my best in the past not to be hyper partisan in this committee. We've been very collaborative in the past, but I would ask members to think about what this meeting and what bringing the ministers in over and over again would do to delay this important work that we have to do on First Nation clean water. And I don't think any Canadian out there would ask us to have, a few minutes of questionings to minister over clean water for First Nations communities in Canada. Thank you.
Just so members know, on the speaking list, I have Ms. Atwin, Mr. Carr, Mr. McLeod, then Mr. Zimmer. So first, next to Ms. Atwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll cede my time to Mr. Carr.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess there's a couple of things here. The first is that I think Mr. Batiste just made a very reasonable suggestion, which was to help facilitate a conversation with colleagues around the table with the ministers that allows us to bypass the rigidity of the structure that we often have during witness testimony at committee. And if the intent is genuinely to engage in a conversation, then the ability to do that is there. If the desire is to have ministers in front of the camera to take partisan shots, then that's a different story. Ministers, I'm sure, would be happy to reappear in front of the committee during the study of this legislation, for example. But I take some opposition to the assertions here that I think you referenced in your ruling a few moments ago, Mr. Chair, that there is a difference between not liking the answers to questions that you get and the questions that, the answers rather that you are getting from the ministers. On a technicality, Mr. Chair, and as you may know, I'm the chair of the House Procedure on Committee and House Affairs, so I was a little bit curious about the admissibility of this particular motion, not by virtue of the fact that it was introduced outside of committee business or the relevancy of the discussion at hand, but more so that it asks for the committee to compel ministers. I've checked with the law clerks here. There is nothing in a standing order that gives a committee the power to compel a minister to appear. If my colleagues in opposition can point to the standing order or the precedent that exists to allow for that to occur, I'd love to hear it. In the absence of that, and perhaps we're getting there, my suggestion would be that we either very quickly move to amend the motion as is in order to make it admissible, in my view, and in line with what the standing orders allow a committee to undertake vis-a-vis the inviting of witnesses. And if not, then my suggestion would be, and I'll come back to the mic if necessary, that we adjourn the conversation so that we can get on with the very important business of leveraging the expertise and guidance of our officials that are here to help us undertake the study on C61, which matters very much to all of us. So again, my hope is that we can either very quickly amend this and make it consistent with standing orders that currently exist. Otherwise, I would recommend to my colleagues that we adjourn debate on this And if not, then I would like to get a ruling from our law clerks that just so happen to be here today because of the study on C61 to clarify for us whether or not the motion as currently written is actually legitimate in so far that it is asking the committee to do something that we are not actually within our right to do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carr. Next on the list, I have Mr. McLeod. Just for members, so they know, Mr. Zimmer, you'll be next, and then après ça, Monsieur Lemire, and then Mr. Shields. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. Ben covered, Mr. Carr covered some of what I wanted to ask, and I don't have a copy of the motion, so I'm not sure if the wording was request, ask, order. So maybe we can get that. I'm not sure what exactly we're asking, and I'm assuming if we had the ministers come and we're not happy, we're not happy with the answers, we're going to ask them to come back again. And if they're still not happy, we're going to ask them to come back again. I'm not sure if that's permissible, but that's likely what could happen if we're going to keep asking ministers to come back if we're not satisfied with their answers. So it leads me to my next point is what happens with our study days. Today is going to be taken up with this discussion. A minister's visit that we didn't schedule is going to be added. So are we adding to the study? It's just part and parcel of the bigger study on what we're trying to achieve. And I'm not sure if the ministers have the time in a 2-hour period when we've got 3 ministers to provide the detailed answers that some of the members are looking for. And maybe we need to add a written question component to this committee's agenda so that we could do that, because it's getting pretty complicated. And I guess the ask could go to the ministers to come back. I'm not sure if they'll agree, because that's opening the door to being required to come back on and on. So those are my points.
Thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. Next, I'll be going to Mr. Zimmer.
So a couple of things. So I'll make the amendment as requested. And the amended text is as follows: that Minister Haiju and Minister Vandel be asked to return to the committee within 2 weeks and for 2 hours to answer questions, and that if they do not return as requested, the chair be instructed to report to the House that the committee strongly requests the minister's attendance from time to time as it sees fit. So that is our amended text to the motion. I still would like to speak to something Mr. Baptiste said, but I guess now that that amendment is on the table, I don't know where you want to go with that from here.
So, again, it'd be nice if that amendment can be circulated, just so members should have that. Okay, so members should have that. Maybe I'll just pause for a second to make sure members have that in their inboxes here. Been circulated, so you should have that in your inbox. Just give a moment for people to have a quick look at it, and then we'll yeah. So I had Mr. Carr first, and then I have Mr. Shields. Did you have your hand up as well?
Yeah, I signaled you when Bob was talking.
Okay, sorry.
Acknowledge me.
We'll start with Mr. Schmel then. Oh, I think you had him on that one down there. Right, okay. Apologies. So first I'll have Mr. Schmale and then Mr. Carr.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Mr. Zimmer for amending that motion. I know he has more to say on this, but to echo some of the comments, let's get this to a vote, to the amendment, to then the amended motion if it passes, and continue the business of the day. So we're ready to vote, so we don't hold anything more up. Let's go.
Thank you, Mr. Smale. Mr. Carr.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm glad Mr. Schmale brought up no further delays, because a concern that I have with the amendment is that it still allows for us to delay the passage of C-61. So I have no concern with the ministers reappearing. My concern is that the timeline is going to likely overlap with the ongoing study that we're doing on C-61. We have a substantial number of amendments. Now, I would be open to further amendment that could say upon the completion of C-61. My concern is that this is an incredibly important piece of legislation that I think we all want to pass. And the more that we kick it down the road with interruptions like this, despite the fact that it's on an important matter, which is the appearance of ministers, the more we jeopardize the ability for this important piece of legislation that First Nations across the country are looking for. So my recommendation would be, and I'm not going to formally move this amendment, I'm just informing the committee, that we adopt a motion that says, following the completion of C-61, which would mean clause by clause and its subsequent passage, that we then ask for the ministers to appear. But if we don't do that, then the ministers will appear. Anything can happen. We can get into a filibuster. We can get into a long, drawn-out conversation. And again, we jeopardize the ability for this committee to swiftly deal with C-61, which is not only a critically important piece of legislation, but it also has an immense and complicated number of amendments that is going to take us a substantial amount of time. Further to that, I think as lawmakers, what we understand too with the complexity of this is that if we begin going through a third of C-61 and then ministers appear, and then we go back to C-61 the next meeting or meeting after that, well, where were we on that? Oh yeah, we did this. We lose our rhythm. We lose our understanding. It becomes more complicated for the clerks. So again, my urging to the committee is change the wording. I'm not officially putting that forward, but change the wording that says following the completion of C-61, the ministers appear. If we are all serious about getting C-61 passed expediently, then move this a little further down the line. You'll get your opportunity to talk to the ministers, but let us pass the legislation first. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Next on the list, I have Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I read the last clause of this motion, attendance from time to time as it sees fit. That means the committee would determine at what time they see fit. No. That's two different clauses. Get your legal book out. That's two different clauses, because the second one puts the flexibility to this committee to make the decision as to when that would happen. Read it carefully. It would be the committee that would determine. The request to the House is in 2 weeks. But if you read that last clause, it then is the committee that determines as it sees fit when. Whichever it is, but there's two clauses in here, and the flexibility is still rests in the hands of this committee to determine when they would appear. It's still there. It's still up to the committee to determine that when they would appear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shields. On the list, I have Ms. Atwin, Ms. Idlout, then Mr. Batiste. So next going to Ms. Atwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just kind of echoing a lot of what my colleagues are saying here, but I cannot support in any way anything that would jeopardize the timeline that we have on C61. This is critically important. I mean, Indigenous communities have been waiting long enough for this. I think that we owe it to them to make this our first priority and to really focus on this piece. If the concern here is really about the Indigenous procurement piece, we're studying it at OGO this afternoon. You're more than welcome to join us there and ask some questions. Happy also to facilitate any further questions or follow-ups with ministers. Of course, we want to get the answers to questions for colleagues. That's critically important as well. And so I think we're close on this. It's just for me, any iota of an inclination that we would delay or possibly use this to delay C61 is just I cannot in any in any terms support that. And so it's really critical that we're very clear with this. I understand what Mr. Shields is trying to say, but to me it still looks like there's that 2-week time frame, which again, because of the tight turnaround for clause by clause with C61, I got to see that language really tightened up to have that assurance. And so I think my colleague going after me might be putting forward a sub-amendment, if I'm not mistaken, but it would be to really have that clarification piece around the timeline of finishing C61 first. Thank you.
Before going to the next speaker, Ms. Atwin, are you moving a sub-amendment or just suggesting one at this time?
Well, we kind of danced around it a little bit. I will move the sub-amendment to insert the piece around finishing the legislation of C61.
So, Mr. McLeod.
And if people are speaking without using the mic, there's discussions going on back and forth. I can only hear the person that's on the microphone, and so I'm missing half of what's being discussed here.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod, and that's a point very well taken. As much as possible, if members can make sure that they speak when they have the floor here and use the microphone so that all members can participate, and as well as the members that are not here in person that are joining by video conference as well. And so, Ms. Atwin, you are moving a sub-amendment here. Could you just read out the sub-amendment just for members' certainty here before we actually move into debate on that?
Yes, just 1 second as I'm waiting for kind of order of where to put it. So it would simply be asked to return to the committee within 2 weeks following the conclusion of legislation at INAN C61.
Atwin. So next, on the sub-amendment, the list that I have here is Mr. Batiste, Mr. Zimmer, then Mr. Carr.
I support that sub-amendment, and I think it shows the sincerity. It would go a long way in showing the sincerity of this committee, that we're not trying to filibuster C61, that we're actually concerned about what the genuine point of the original motion is, but not being in the way of First Nations finally accessing legislation that protects clean water for them.
Thank you, Mr. Batiste. Next, Mr. Zimmer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I guess what troubles me by this conversation, what Mr. Carr has even said, like what's keeping the Liberal government from bringing water to First Nations communities is this bill. You've been in government for 9 years, and you still haven't got it done. You were supposed to get it done in 2021, and now you're pretending that this legislation is holding everything up. Your government, you could have had it done when you should have had it done, when you said you were going to have it done several years ago. I would just put forward to the committee that we do have witnesses here. We want to get to the legislation, to the amendments that we've talked about. Let's just get it going.
Call the vote. Let's go. Let's vote.
Let's call the vote on the original motion.
Thanks, Mr. Zimmer. I'm afraid we do have to deal with the sub-amendments that have been moved. But so next I have Mr. Carr.
Yeah, I mean, Okay, I take Mr. Zimmer's point at face value, but whether or not he feels or others feel that the legislation could have come sooner doesn't negate the fact that it's here now, and that what we're talking about is delaying it. So let's just very clearly lay out what we're talking about. The sub-amendment says, we agree, invite the ministers back because there have been concerns from some members about the clarity or transparency of their answers. Notwithstanding the fact that I disagree with that assessment, I respect members' rights and ability to ask the ministers to come back. What we're saying is, yes, let's do that. We agree. However, before we do that, let's conclude C-61. So let's conclude C-61 before we bring the ministers back. And this is what I don't understand from my colleagues across the way. Why is it that they would have a concern with getting C-61 finished first? No one's disputing that the ministers ought to come back, even if we disagree. We're accepting that. Just get 61 done first. The last point I would like to make is to something Mr. Shields said to me a few moments ago, and I don't quite understand this. The motion says, as was amended, that the committee report to the House that from time to time ministers be invited. That's what we do. How do you think we invited the ministers 2 weeks ago? We didn't need a motion that was reported back to the House that was following through on something that some committee previously said from time to time. We would invite the ministers, and in accordance with the written rule of that motion that went to the House, the ministers appeared. They appeared because we asked them to. This is fluff. It's not necessary. So I urge my colleagues, adopt the sub-amendment, amend the motion accordingly, invite the ministers back, but do it once we finish C-61. There's no hiding. There's no evasiveness. We agree the minister should come. We just want 61 finished first. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carr. Next on the list, I have Mr. Batiste. No, not Mr. Batiste. Okay. Well, next on the list, I have Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move all previous questions.
Okay. Mr. Miller? Pardon me?
That's all of them. All previous questions, we vote on every amendment and the main motion.
So, Mr. Shields, I'm afraid we need to vote on all the sub-amendments.
That's what I'm saying.
before
All
we get-
previous questions means all of them.
Procedure. Mr. Shields knows
So,
his procedure.
before that, we need to just finish the speaking list. So I have Mr. Miller.
No. I've called the vote. You want me to get the green book out, I'll go get it. But if I call the vote on all previous questions, then we start voting. Now, and we go amendment to the main motion.
We're going to briefly suspend to look at this. perused the Green Book. Not the first time this week, I might add. So on page 1068, chapter 20 on committees, says the motion that this question be now put is known as the previous question. In committee, motions for the previous question are inadmissible. With all that said, I know we just have one more person on the speaking list, and then hopefully we can get to a vote on this. Mr. Melillo, you're the next and perhaps the last. Oh, then I have, okay, well, then we'll have one. So we'll have Mr. Melillo, après ça, Monsieur Lemire, and after that, Ms. Idlout.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if all of the members are out of the timeout yet or not, but nonetheless, I appreciate the opportunity to take the floor. I just had I suppose first a question about the sub-amendment brought forward by Ms. Atwin. I understand we're still waiting for the text of it. I hope we'll be able to get that before we can vote on it. As I had heard it, my concern was there was placing a 2-week restriction on completing C61, which I think is very ambitious. I don't dispute the motive behind it, and I just see getting the text here now. But that would be a concern for me because obviously we have a lot of amendments, as Mr. Carr rightly pointed out, very technical, very important amendments to try to improve the legislation and ensure it's the best it can be. So I just wanted to make sure that that was not the case. But I now have the text, so I will review it. Thank you.
Mr. Melillo, après ça, on a Monsieur Lemire, and after Ms.
That'll be followed by Mr. Lemire, then Ms. Idlout. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that this is a question of accountability for the ministers. Opposition members and members of the government are asking questions to the ministers, and that's also the opportunity to move forward on issues and raise awareness. So there's the public aspect of these answers that allows us to have clarity on our direction. Over the last several months, we have had private and public meetings that have moved us forward. So it's important that we have clear answers to our questions. And in the context of the last meeting, this was not the case. We also have to put things into context. I think that the Liberals are filibustering a bit today, saying that we're not able to move forward on C61. If we would have dealt with this question an hour ago, things would be easy, and we would already be back onto C61. We wouldn't have lost another meeting. And the other context that we have to take into account is the fact that the government does not have certainty that they will still be there after we're done with C61. And I've already stated this, we need public answers to see if they have a clear goal, clear intentions. Can we trust this government and this process? Because there was a public statement of a formal intention to move forward on some important issues for Indigenous people. And so in that sense, I do not support the sub-amendment. I support the amendment on the table.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lemire.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire.
To Ms. Idlout.
Thank you. This was just brought up, 910. It's a sub-amendment. This is highlighted in the bill. I agree with the because this bill C61 is very important to me. But I do have a question. Or well, there'll be an amendment because this amendment is written that the chairperson should produce a report to the parliament requesting with a strong request to the minister. Is this normally the process? requesting the chairperson to produce a report to the Parliament. Can you make this clearer?
Respond to Ms. Idlaut's question. It's very, very rare to have those kinds of this kind of emotion, but it's not out of the order to do that. So, but next on the list I have Mr. Carr, and I'm going to give Mr. Carr just a moment to get back to or to be prepared to speak on it.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I've just sent you, it's in your P9, so if you could share it with the clerks, I wasn't sure where to send it. A sub-amendment here that I think, if I understand correctly, correct. If I understand correctly, has been discussed with some members of the opposition and may get us through the impasse. So it effectively reads, and I've sent this to you, Mr. Chair, in hopes that you will get it very quickly to the clerk to get it to our colleagues, that Minister Hajdu and Minister Vandal be asked to return to the committee within 2 weeks and for 2 hours to answer questions following the conclusion of C-61 legislation at INAN. In French, que les ministres Hajdu et Vandal soient invités à revenir.
That Ministers Hajdu and Vidal be invited to come back within the next 2 weeks for 2 hours to respond to questions after the passage of C-61 at INAN.
My understanding is there have been some conversations with members of the opposition, so I'm proposing this sub-amendment with hopes that this breaks the impasse. I know that there was some confusion from colleagues, Mr. Chair, so while I have the floor, I will just take a moment to put forward my own 2 cents. But just the way that I read this is within 2 weeks and for 2 hours following the conclusion. Just want to make clear that my interpretation is that doesn't mean that we have to finish 61 within 2 weeks. It just means that once 61 is finished, 2 weeks following that, they would be invited. So just for clarity, if we have to strengthen that language, that's fine. But again, it's just so that nobody feels as though we're saying we have to finish 61 within a 2 week period. It means that once it's done, 2 weeks after that, the invitation would take place. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
So my understanding here is we can't move another sub-amendment until we voted on the one that's currently on the floor right now. So just for members, remember Mr. Lemire, for clarity here, just want to make sure, following Mr. McLeod's point, that rather than talk across the committee room here, just to make sure that you have the floor before doing that. But it may be possible, if there is unanimous consent, for Ms. Atwin to remove her sub-amendment, and this one can be dealt with, but that would be necessary first. But next on the list, I have Ms. Idlaut.
I just want...
First of all, I just want to thank you, Ben Carr, for the clarification. And then I want to put this out there that this is a concern for me. Looking at the amendments of Bill C-61, it's a large undertaking. will there be a delay when there's a 2 weeks? I want to. I agree with the request for a 2 week request for the Conservatives, and then if we are going to request the ministers to come back, they might not come back to this. I just want you to be aware that I mostly agree with the Conservative and the Bloc to request for the ministers to come back in 2 weeks' time, because we need answers. When we haven't been getting the answers, our work will not be able to go forward.
Thank you, Ms. Idlout. Next on the speaking list here, I have Ms. Atwin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just seeking the unanimous consent to remove my sub-amendment.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Atwin. Is there unanimous consent? Not seeing any opposition to that, so that would pass. So I guess we are with that amended. Sorry, I'm just going to pause for 1 sec. Move to Mr. Carr, who had proposed a sub-amendment, which couldn't be dealt with at the time.
So I won't repeat it, Mr. Chair. I do believe, can members just confirm they've received the sub-amendment from the clerk?
I just sent it.
It's just, okay, it's just been sent. Sorry, Lori. The one that I had proposed, which was inadmissible because Jenica's was there, but Jenica's has now been removed, so I'm going to move mine. And for the benefit of committee, I could reread it, but it is in your inboxes now. That Minister Hajdu and Minister Vandal be asked to return to committee within 2 weeks and for 2 hours to answer questions following the conclusion of C-61 legislation at INAN. Que les ministres Hajdu et Vandal soient invités à...
That Ministers Hajdu and Vandal be called to return to committee within 2 weeks and for 2 hours after the passage of Bill C-61.
I'll move that sub-amendment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody that wants to speak on this? Or should we go to a vote? Okay, sounds like we have a vote. I'm not seeing any disagreements here. Okay, we'll do a recorded division then.
Mr. Baptiste.
I agree with the amendment.
Mr. Carr.
Yes.
Ms. Atwin.
Yes.
Mr. Hanley.
Yes.
Mr. McLeod.
Agreed.
Mr. Milelo.
No.
Mr. Schmale.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No.
Mr. Zimmer.
No.
Monsieur Lemire.
Contre.
Ms. Idlout.
I say no.
Five yeas, 6 nays.
To remind members, because I know there's been a lot of different motions circulating here, I'll just read it out. So the sub-amendment that we are now going to be returning to debate is that Minister Hajdu and Minister Vandal be asked to return to the committee within 2 weeks and for 2 hours to answer questions, and that if they do not return as requested, the chair be instructed to report to the House that the committee strongly request the minister's attendance from time to time as it sees fit. So I see Mr. Batiste has his hand up. So, and then Ms. Atwin.
Mr. Chair, I'm hoping we can pause this for like 5 minutes just so I can confirm with my team the implications of this wording.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll suspend briefly here.
We'll have some.
Getting back to order here. I understand there's been some discussions in between the parties, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Zimmer.
Yeah, I'll wait for the mic there. Yeah, I will withdraw my motion or my amendment to the motion. I'll actually ask for, I think, unanimous consent to withdraw that amendment to the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zimmer. I'm going to look around to make sure we have unanimous consent for Mr. Zimmer to move the motion, and I see there's unanimous consent here and online as well. So that will pass. That amendment is moved or passed. And I see Ms. Idlot has her hand up.
Thank you. I move to amend the motion to read as follows, that Minister Haju and Minister Vandal to be asked to return to the committee within 2 weeks and for 2 hours to answer questions.
Just a quick point of clarification, Speaker.
Over to Mr. Schmale just for a quick.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. I think the member, my text says 2 sitting weeks, but I just want to clarify that is the case, not 2 weeks, 2 sitting weeks. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmale. Members should have received the text of that motion in their inbox. So with that, is there any members that wishes to speak on this motion? Okay, in that event, let's go to a vote.
Mr. Baptiste,
Because I feel C61 should be the priority, I'm going to vote no.
Mr. Carr,
Yeah.
Ms. Atwin,
Yes.
Mr. Hanley,
Yes.
Mr. McLeod,
Yes.
Mr. Milelo,
Yes.
Mr. Schmale,
Yes.
Mr. Shields,
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer,
Yes.
Monsieur Lemire,
En faveur.
Ms. Idlot,
Ang po.
I say yes.
10 yeas, 1 nays.
Great. Well, so that will pass. And then I guess at this point, we will go back to the motion as amended. Is there any debate? Okay, well then let's move to a vote.
Mr. Baptiste,
No, for the same reason.
Mr. Carr,
No.
Ms. Atwin,
No.
Mr. Hanley,
No.
Mr. McLeod,
No.
Mr. Milelo,
Yes.
Mr. Schmale,
Yes.
Mr. Shields,
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer,
Yes.
Monsieur Lemire,
Oui.
Ms. Idlot,
I say yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay, well, that motion, 6 yeas, 5 nays, that will pass. And I understand that at this point, Ms. Idlot has her hand up. So I will pass the floor over to you.
Thank you. First of all, before this, I want to acknowledge that yesterday and the day before, I was visiting Kimberly Murray, who has been who has the role of the special interlocutor. They had a a meeting, a conference, and then they are dealing with heavy items, heavy topics. So my request is, I expect that the questions need to be answered properly, and then to acknowledge Senator Murray Sinclair is in the hospital. He is in our thoughts. Many people have him in their thoughts because he's helped many people. So I just want to put this out there. To the family, we are thinking of you, and to move to a notice of motion. I put this out there. Submit this in October 30 as a committee. That the committee temporarily delay the start of the clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-61 to allow for sufficient review of the large number of amendments proposed by all parties, and to resume clause-by-clause considerations on Monday, November 4, 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Idlout. With that, I'll see if there is any. Is there any members that wish to speak on that? Okay, well then maybe we can move to a vote. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think we're all in agreement.
I think it looks like we have consensus around the table here, so Ms. Idlout's motion will pass. So, we will start clause-by-clause consideration on Monday, and I just also, before we wrap today, I do want to thank our officials for coming today. Mr. Fairburn, Mr. Barbosa, Ms. Wilkinson, and Ms. Blake for being here. Committee is scheduled to end in about 20 minutes, and I do want to thank our officials and our analysts and legislative clerks for being here. There was some discussion about moving in camera to have a formal opportunity for members to ask questions, but given that we have our officials here, perhaps it's easier just to do that informally if you do have any questions on the many amendments that have been submitted. But we will start our formal process of clause by clause on Monday. And just for awareness of members, we have secured additional resources on Monday so that we can go up to 7:30. So I just wanted to flag that now. So there was some concern that time would be lost by not starting this today, and that will ensure that the time that we had today would be made up at that point. So I just wanted to flag that for members in advance. Thank everybody for being here today, especially our officials. But with that, is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Meeting adjourned.